To know Winchester is to know Smith & Wesson, because Horace Smith and Daniel B. Wesson really brought the idea to the table, or tried to, for what would later become the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. And that was, we consider Winchester to be a rifle company by and large, but originally Smith & Wesson's plans were for handguns, and that's what they originally sold Oliver Winchester, a shirt maker from New Haven, Connecticut, on, was a handgun that fired what they called rocket balls. But back in the 1850s, they just couldn't find a way of making it practical. And as Winchester's shares in investment in this gun company grew, he realized that the way Smith & Wesson were going with it wasn't going to end up being anything that they could actually make a profit on.
Now, Winchester was a business guy, and he was a sharp guy, and he wasn't afraid to sue people. He wasn't afraid to be sued, and he ended up going into business with Benjamin Tyler Henry. And Benjamin Tyler Henry came up with a .44 rimfire cartridge. This whole Winchester thing, it's like chicken or egg. You need the cartridge, you need the rifle. You know, if you have the cartridge out, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. But what happens is Benjamin Tyler Henry's design for a lever-action rifle eventually becomes the 1860, the model 1860 Henry rifle. And it is fed by a tubular magazine that's underneath the barrel. But there's some quirky things about the Henry. In particular, the magazine tube underneath is propelled by a spring, but there's a little tab there, and that if you want to load this gun, you've got to turn it on its, put it on its butt, you've got to rotate the magazine over, you've got to take the spring and its follower, and you've got to move it over, then you drop the cartridges down, then you put the follower back, and then you rotate the whole thing, then you can shoot the gun. The problem is if you hold the gun like this, that follower hits your hand. So you have to learn to move your hand out of the way to allow the cartridges to feed. In 1866, they addressed that problem. Henry was out of the picture, but his basic gun got something that really changed lever-action firearms, and really changed firearms in America. And that thing was the King's patent loading gate. So instead of having to turn the barrel and magazine and drop cartridges in, what King's patented loading gate did was allow the user to simply shuck cartridges in on the lower right-hand side of the receiver and just push those cartridges in. They'd go right up a contained magazine tube, and they'd be held there under spring tension until that simple toggle mechanism was worked. And a cartridge would drop down and come up. And then, of course, with the bolt closed, you could feed all the cartridges you wanted to into the gun without having to set it down and turn the barrel and all kinds of other things. And really, in 1866, the gun called the Model 1866, the first rifle to bear the Winchester name, set the future pattern for all future Winchesters.
This was the rifle that took off. And from there on out, every few years, Winchester introduced a new and improved lever-action repeating rifle. The 1866 took this .44 rimfire cartridge. This was a pretty good cartridge. It was nowhere near the class of the true rifle cartridges of the time in the .45-70 class. First improvement was the model 1873, went to a steel frame with a removable side plate. They're using that toggle action. Now, people are familiar with the toggle on the Luger, where the toggle comes up to work the action. In the early Winchester lever actions, the toggle would dip down when the lever was pulled to retract the bolt. The 73 had this action like the 66 had, but it took the centerfire cartridges, beginning with the 4440. Took the 4440, 3840, 3220 cartridges introduced as the years went on. We think of those as revolver class cartridges today, but the truth is they were introduced as rifle cartridges in these Winchester 1873 repeaters. Colt came up with the good idea, hey, let's chamber a handgun in the same caliber so a guy on the frontier far between ammunition supply can use the same ammunition in his long gun and his handgun. But the 73 was a big improvement over the 66, remained popular into the 20th century, but you needed a rifle that would fire a true rifle power cartridge. And they came up with that 3 years later in the model 1876.
Want to know what's happening at American Rifleman? Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. We'll be right back.
When you think about the few truly big-name American firearm companies, certainly one of them is Winchester Repeating Arms. And certainly as soon as you say Winchester, the image that you get is of that rider on a horse who has that lever-action rifle. Winchester, with its early lever-action designs after the 1866 and into the 1873 and the later guns, those guns were coined as, the gun that won the West. And you think about that and you say, the gun that won the West, winning the West, that was a big deal. America, during that expansion period in the early part of the country, guns weren't just wall hangers. Guns were daily life tools, and they were essential tools.
The first interaction between Winchester Firearms, Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and John Moses Browning came because of the Utah inventor's Model 1878 single shot. One of Winchester's salesmen was out and about selling stuff and came across this design. He immediately thought it was of merit. They initially thought they were going to try and sue this Browning guy, but then they decided, you know what? Let's not sue him. He's a pretty smart guy. Let's buy some designs from him. And that 1878 Browning became the 1885 Winchester single shot. The 1885 Winchester single shot, a pretty strong action, made in a number of variations. There are high walls for large cartridges like 4570 or 5190. There are low walls for smaller, low-pressure cartridges. There are thick sides, thin sides. But it was the gun that put Browning and Winchester together for the first time. And also, while Browning was meeting with the Winchester folks, he said, oh, by the way, I have this lever-action rifle design too. And that gun became kind of the granddaddy of big Winchesters, and that's the Model 1886.
This is where the design really takes off. He brought in the real lever-action rifle that took real rifle cartridges, introduced the Model 1886, John Moses Browning design, got away with the link action of the early Henry and Winchesters, developed a very sleek Model 1886 rifle, took the 4570 cartridge on up to 5110 cartridges. An effective repeating rifle, a powerful repeating rifle, had it made. A few years later, 1892, another John Moses Browning design. They go back to their staple, the so-called handgun power cartridges, 4440, 3840, 3220. Introduce this very elegant, slim, and handy little Model 1892 lever-action rifle. Now, this is a lever-action rifle that was used in every Hollywood Western, regardless if it was set in 1850 or 1900, just because it was such a handy little gun, very reliable, took the Hollywood 5-in-1 blanks, easy to get, and really one of Winchester's best-selling models, until 2 years later when the Winchester Model 1894 was developed. Smokeless powder was coming along. The hunting cartridge was no longer a big black powder cartridge with a 45 or 50 caliber bullet. You could have a smokeless cartridge in a 30 caliber bullet that would give you much better accuracy, much greater power at longer ranges. And this was the Browning design Model 1894, and this was the gun that became the Winchester.